So you're a naturopath. You're talking
Yes,
about circadian rhythm. You're talking about light. What impact? I'm assuming that you're big on stress management. What
for
impact
sure.
does stress have on our health, and what are some things that we can do to alleviate that?
Well, I think it's so fascinating because I think there's physical dimension of stress, right? Exercise is a stress, and then we get a good adaptation response. And then there's like psychological stress, which is oftentimes created due to our relationship to a situation. And this is where we get into like the influence between our mindset and how that actually affects physiology and gene transcription. But here's the deal. When we feel stressed, there is a chemical basis to that. Like, let's say that something happens and we think it's a really big deal. Our body will start to dump cortisol and noradrenaline, these kind of stress hormones, into the blood to prepare us to deal with the stress. It's an activating kind of like short-term response. But cortisol, when kind of secreted, it crushes your immune system. It shrinks your brain over time. It causes more stress and pressure on your heart. And to live a long, healthy life, you want the energy and vitality from good hormones, the youthful hormones, but you also want to be in a relaxed parasympathetic state. You can almost think of like the number of heartbeats you have throughout your life as kind of like your lifeline. And we actually know this, like a tortoise lives 100 years. A mouse lives for like a year, maybe less, right? The mouse has a very twitchy, fast heart rate kind of like nervous system. And so anytime we can get the nervous system in a more restorative state, but have the ability to burst when we need to, we're in good shape. And I think that's what a lot of guys experience when they're TRT, when they had low energy, but they felt like anxious beforehand. And they get on TRT, they kind of feel just like more calm, more powerful, more centered, and maybe even a little more relaxed. Like I guess in your state with the anxiety dimension that changed, it's so important. And so how do you deal with stress? Well, you increase your body's resiliency to stress through things like exercise, through things like cold exposure, heat exposure. I'm talking about sauna and cold. Like any of these kind of physiologic external stressors in the right dose can give you restorative capacity. But none of those things work if your sleep is jacked up. None of those things work if you're not getting enough sleep or if you're getting blue light and their circadian rhythm is off base. And obviously, you can take stress fighting things like magnesium or an herb like ashwagandha that a lot of people are high on, or different kinds of functional mushrooms. Like these things are good, but when we're looking at body systems, we always want to look at the highest order possible. And the highest order are the things that like give us the most primal information. The sun and sleep is like top of that thing. Like anything pharmacologically, we're messing around with a certain supplement, like that's pretty low on the order. So you can mess around on the low level or you can mess around on the high level. And that's another reason why testosterone works, because it works on a pretty high level for men. Like you get testosterone right, and a lot of things start to sort themselves out downstream.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying. So you mentioned physical activity, the stress response there, and the adaptation. It's a benefit. Stress being more of an emotional or a mental state.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like what you're saying is that too can improve with physiological.
It
Uh,
will.
okay.
So
What?
why do people who get into cold tubs tend to have less depression and more focus? Obviously,
Yeah.
there's more like of a there's some dopamine and stuff like that rises, but you really just train your nervous system to be okay to be in a certain situation. Like you're in the cold, you got that immediate like, oh, and then you kind of like settle in and you learn how to like actually chill out in the face of a stimulus. Something that used to be scary now is perceived as being okay. And now we're kind of getting into mention of different mental practices that could be very helpful for this. And I think this is where things like prayer, journaling, meditation cannot be overlooked, because it's a process of becoming more aware and introspective of like what kind of mental patterns and scripts and emotions that we're allowing to rule us, as opposed to just recognizing and then being able to like sink into it. And a lot of our stress patterns are merely habitual. Like we've learned to become stressed out because this has been a habitual response. And the cool thing about habits is they can be changed, not necessarily easily, but they can be shifted once we become aware of them and start to work at it.
So I wonder if, and track with me on this one.
Mm-hmm.
If okay, so we're responding physically to physical stimulus, we're getting
Yes.
physically stronger. We're not necessarily responding mentally to the mental. If you're just a stressed person, it's not like you learn to handle that stress better because you're practicing stress.
Right.
And it almost sounds like what you're saying is that if that is you, that you will become more prone to be stressed. So if you stay in that stressed mindset, you're not
Yes.
getting less stressed, you're getting more stressed, because then you're training your mind to be stressed when certain triggers come up, right?
Yes. And how we start our days has this kind of like knock on effect. So we start our days, and many people are very reactive. we have something that happens with the family, or we start to get on the train of the phone and the notifications or things we need to do, and we become very reactive. And reactivity just begets more reactivity throughout the day. And now you've kind of gotten on this hamster wheel, and then you go to bed and you're still like overactive, and then you kind of start the next day. And this is where momentum starts to carry on. And this is why I'm a huge believer in having even simple and short ones, but morning routines and evening routines, these little bookends that can kind of set both the physiological and psychological framework for the rest of the day, and can kind of create a pattern that can be more healthy. So imagine if in the morning you had a few minutes to actually sit and journal. Maybe you read a Bible or some kind of book that feels connected to you, or you just kind of like settle in to your system. Like, we need to tap deep into the nervous system. Many of us have heard of like Wim Hof, that guy who gets into the cold and does the breathing. The reason his stuff works is because he's getting deep into the physiology of taking that stress response and bringing into a place of safety, of oxygenation, of relaxation in the face of like intensity. And I think we can do that in minor ways in the mornings and the evenings. In the morning, it's good because it sets the tone for the day. In the evening, it's good because it can kind of break a pattern that might have happened with some reactivity and kind of like reset for the next day. And I think that's the process of actually shifting this stuff. It's going to be small, incremental, day in, day out, start to make some shifts. It's not like you're going to make a full 180 right away, but if you can start to shift a few degrees, then you're in the right direction.
Yeah. Can you walk me through what the last 90 minutes of your day and the first 90 minutes of your day look like?